Ty, how you going?
Hey, good. How are you?
Yeah, good. So for this assignment, we had to look up 4 forms of media and then take away learnings from it.
Yep.
So I looked up 4 different videos, and the first one focused on how important strength-based practice is
Okay.
and the negative impact that judgments can have on people with disability.
Yep.
The second one talked about addiction and really questioned lots of the views that I currently have on addiction, which I found really interesting.
Yeah.
And also just about legislations around drug use and the impacts on health. And the third piece was about leadership,
Mm-hmm.
and it broke down different leadership styles and basically just pros and cons, what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
And the final piece that I chose was about healthcare, and it looked like it reflected back on what we're doing now
Mm-hmm.
and things that have worked and things that don't work, and looked forward into things that potentially we could do,
Yeah.
which I found really interesting. And I chose these 4 topics because they're all areas that interest me. They're all areas that I don't really feel like I have much knowledge in
Yeah.
and much experience in. And so I figured that by increasing my knowledge in these areas, it'll be able to help my future OT practice.
Yeah. Sweet.
And so for my first one, my major learnings that I had were that even though we've spent our whole 3 years in uni talking about strengths-based practice, not everyone will have done that.
Yeah.
And so when I'm coming into a community, or if I'm coming into someone's home, they may have had experience with so many health professionals that have been really negative, and like how much that can impact people.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about it because we've always talked about how important it is just to be strength-based.
Yeah.
I'd never even really seen the impact of what can happen if you don't do that.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think it just reinforced how important it is to be able to like come into a situation, see the strengths in a community, recognise what's going wrong, but be able to build on like everything that's working.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the second one I looked at was about drug addiction,
Mm-hmm.
and he talked about how in Portugal they've legalised all drugs,
Okay.
which is really different to what we're used to.
Yeah.
And they don't actually, they treat addiction as a health condition.
Okay.
And so that's also different to what we're used to. In the media and even just in Australia, you get incarcerated for it, you go to rehab.
Yeah.
And so the whole view is completely different. And they looked at this this research, which basically demonstrated that if you give someone drugs, but you also give them the opportunity for relationships, you give them the opportunity to work and have hobbies and productive activities,
Yeah.
they're not even going to use the drugs
Yeah.
that much. And it was really this cycle of making sure that we have connection in the community
Yep.
to decrease the use of drugs. And it links in with social determinants of health.
Yeah.
Because if you have like satisfied areas of social determinants of health,
Yeah.
along with these human connections, the rates of drug addiction decrease
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
And it even talked about that often the views that we have on drugs, like I don't know about you, but my views on people that use drugs used to be really quite negative.
Yeah. Same.
And often the reason the drug laws, like prohibition, came in was because it was like people of certain races were starting to use them,
Mm-hmm.
and it was actually racism that started prohibition. Like it was negative views on these people. Oh, now they're using these drugs, and so that's why prohibition came in around certain areas,
Yep.
which I found really interesting because I didn't know that. But
Yep.
my views on this have now changed, and hopefully this will reduce my bias when working with people in different communities.
Yeah. Definitely.
I also then looked at another video that talked about leadership, and the first part was about in a workplace. It had like the boss's view on his own leadership and his skills in the community that he was working in.
Yeah.
And he thought he was an amazing leader, was so proud of himself,
Yeah.
and he said he did really well, and that obviously all the feedback he was going to get was really good.
Yeah.
However, when talking to all the workers there, they felt like his leadership wasn't satisfactory.
Yeah.
And that came down to that their like values and beliefs were different to
Mm-hmm.
what the boss valued and believed in, and the impact of that on leadership is huge. And even just the blind spots you can have when being a leader, like
Yeah.
feedback's so important, and making sure that you align your values with the group that you're working with is so important. And they're like the main things that I took away from it.
Yeah.
And then I looked at another one that talked about self-leadership and the ability to improve your own leadership, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked at self-reflection, self-regulation, and self-awareness. And it gave you like this tip about, like, think about a leader that you don't like, and think about the qualities in them, the reasons why you don't like that.
Yeah.
And then think about yourself. Like, do you do any of these things? Are you doing that?
Yeah.
And then being able to reflect on, like, what is a good leader? why you think they're good, are you able to do those things as well?
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting way to be able to self-reflect. And that's something that I think I'll be able to use throughout my career as an OT, implementing it, whether I'm in a community or whether I'm just like working with a family.
Yeah.
And then the last one was about healthcare, and it talked about how important holistic healthcare is.
Mm-hmm.
And like obviously we are holistic as occupational therapists, but it was looking at healthcare in a general way and how people often have really negative experiences in healthcare. And I can speak for that. I've had some horrible experiences in healthcare, but even just recognising that OTs always have supported change. Like they come in and that's what they're doing. Like all occupational therapists are coming into places and wanting to impact people and create change. And I think it just helped me recognise that and be able to see that change is so important and that the ability to be holistic is not just specific to us, it has to be specific to all healthcare workers.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're the ones that I found and I just thought they were really interesting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sweet.